Hello and welcome to episode 53 of the LiveFitNow Podcast. My name is Vicky Brown and I am your host. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to an episode of my podcast today. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do hit that button now. And if you like this episode or another one that you've listened to, I would be so grateful if you were to share it with your friends and family and help spread the message of the LiveFitNow podcast. Without further ado, here is the conversation on fermentation. My guest today is a nutritionist, health coach, breathwork coach, gut health expert, and fermenting specialist. Her name is Nikki Windsor, aka the Jungle Goddess. Welcome to the LiveFitNow podcast. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. It's beautiful, sunny, and just how I like it.
Excellent. So I always think a good place to start is just, tell me a little bit more about your background and how and why you've chosen to specialize in your specific areas.
So my first career was in corporate IT. I was on the career ladder and career focused and driven, and started off as a computer programmer, moved up into leadership, and in the end I led teams of computer programmers building large analytical data warehouses for the largest banks in the UK. But I hit a health crisis when I was 37. Now, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 15, and I'd lived with that challenge through all of that. But 37, I had to have major surgery, and I went back to work and I got sick again. And they couldn't find sufficient evidence of Crohn's disease to account for the severity of my symptoms. So they're like, right, you've got IBS as well. And it was at that point I made the connection between stress and my symptoms. And I got so bad that I was signed off work and I could barely leave my house. And it was one of those moments, those clarity moments that you get when I'd always loved travel, and I'd done lots of adventure travel trips with groups, and I'd always yearned to travel myself, actually properly travel rather than taking holidays, but thought I had too much to give up to do so. And it was one of those, clarity moments of looking around and thinking everything I have is material and I can give it all up. So within a few days, I decided to take a career break and I could barely leave my house, and I booked a ticket to travel through the Americas for a year. And that ended up, I gave myself 8 months to get well enough to travel. And then what was supposed to be a year traveling through the Americas turned into nearly 11 years living in the jungle of Costa Rica, on my own wellness journey, my own spiritual journey, and trying to figure out how I could live with Crohn's disease in a more holistic way.
I mean, that is quite the travel trip, isn't it?
But I went to Costa Rica for seven weeks, and in total I was there nearly 11 years.
Wow. You must have really loved it. And I think the thing that I find interesting about that is, how did you start to approach that? Because as someone who has indeterminate colitis myself, the idea of taking on that journey when you are not feeling well, there's one thing doing it when you're feeling well, but when you're not, I mean, how did you approach that?
Well, a lot of it is my own determination. And very early on, as I say, I was diagnosed when I was 15, and very early on, I can remember it was kind of an intervention by my family up at my grandparents' house. I think I was 17 or 18 at the time. And they're all saying, you got to bear in mind that back then there was very little known about inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah.
and we didn't have the internet, so you didn't have access to the information that you've got nowadays. So I've got a family who's faced with a daughter, from 15 years old, who's got this disease that nobody knows what caused it, how to prevent it or how to cure it.
Yeah.
And they were, Nikki, you're not as healthy as other people. You need to slow down. And I'm like, no, this disease is not going to affect my life. And I pushed myself outside of boundaries continuously for that. And I can remember the first time when I was 21 was the first time I was going to fly. So it was my first flight. I was going to America to see an ex-boyfriend, and I was concerned about the trip because I suffer, less so now, but in flare-up with a lot of bathroom anxiety. So that fear of leaving a place which is very close to a toilet, because I get diarrhea dominant.
Yeah.
And I was really concerned about that. So it's like, right, what can I use? So even back then I was very much following the Western medicine approach, I was interested in holistic practices because I went and got hypnotherapy. So you nowadays have gut-directed hypnotherapy that is a really good treatment protocol for people with IBS.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I used back then, which was all based around reducing stress. So you go into that anxiety about not being close to a toilet, that pushes you into panic.
Yeah.
And that brings on the symptoms even worse. So yeah, even back then, not really connecting with it, but it was all about trying to manage my anxiety around the condition.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up stress a couple of times, because it interests me. Is that something you noticed for yourself? Because even when I was initially diagnosed, there's a lot of things that the doctors sort of brush over, like, no, we don't. The truth is they don't really know. But if there's one thing that I have definitely noticed, in fact, with anyone I know with a chronic disease, is stress is the biggest trigger for flaring in whatever way that people are flaring. Did you figure that out for yourself over the years? Because I'm guessing that wasn't particularly a conversation piece when you first got diagnosed.
No, and I just talked a lot about anxiety there, and until probably the last 3 years, I'd never considered myself to have anxiety. And it's only with it getting talked about more and recognized more that I've been able to figure out, well, that was anxiety that I was experiencing back then.
Yeah.
But I did figure out the stress part, not in the context of how you identify it today, but it was that I'd had major surgery to remove part of my bowel. I'd recovered from that. I'd gone back to work and I got sick again pretty much straight away. And as I said, they did all of the tests and they're like, yeah, you've got Crohn's disease present, but not to match your symptoms. Yeah. And I had some time off over Christmas and my symptoms eased. And I went back to work, they got worse. I got signed off for a month, they got better. So then I'm like, I was getting ready for promotion. And I'm, for the first time in my career, I'm like, I can't do this. And I made the connection that it was the job. And that's why I took the tough decision at that point, because I had my life kind of mapped out. You're on this meeting expectations of society, and I'd got my dream house, so my mortgage was due to be paid off by 45. I was going to retire at whenever.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, this career path is not worth my health. And so yeah, it was a tough decision to make, but with hindsight, absolutely the right one.
Yeah, I can so tell that. I feel like we need to now hop back to Costa Rica. What experience did you get there that then led you to ending up where you are today and doing what you are today? I'm guessing your name comes from that experience too.
Yes. Well, how I ended up in Costa Rica for so long was a lesson in itself, because it was I was in Guatemala. I was at this amazing youth hostel at a place called Semek Champe, which is just a natural wonder. And I passed up an opportunity to work at the hostel because I had my schedule that I was following. And I was going to Costa Rica to volunteer at a sloth sanctuary.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, no, I want to go and work with the sloths. And I mean, I'd stayed an extra day, but in the end, no, I'm keeping to the schedule. And I regretted it. Not that I didn't love working with the sloths, but they were a lot more focused on the income rather than the animals. So it was at that point I said, right, schedule out the window and let's just see what happens. So I think that was a crucial lesson, because of working in corporate IT, I was doing project management. So it was about keeping to plan. So that was right. Okay, let's see what happens. And yeah, I just found this little remote jungle, oceanside surf village with a sense of community that was overwhelming. And it really was a vortex for people looking for change. And you could go there and absolutely, drink yourself to death, or you could go there and cure yourself of cancer. It had so many resources. So to begin with, I stayed because I signed up to become a dive master. So I never dived before and jumped straight into training as a professional in it.
Amazing.
And I stayed for a while. First couple of years, I think it was just more still the mentality of traveler. But then I start putting down roots. And when my health was bothering me, I was 5 to 8 hours from any medical professionals who could help me. So I had to find ways to alleviate the symptoms myself. So then I started using the resources in that little village, and that's where I started learning about massage therapy. I trained in Thai massage, craniosacral massage. I became a Reiki master. I studied medicinal plants. And eventually I got into fermenting. So fermenting, I'd heard that fermenting was good for gut health. So I started fermenting for me and learning all about it. And I was on a conference for medicinal plants at the capital on a minibus with a load of people from my village. And they were all like, you need to sell this. Sell it at the local market. So they encouraged me, and that was it. Back in 2014, I opened Jungle Goddess. I was named it by people there. They used to call me the Jungle Goddess because I just adapted to jungle life so easily. So that's why I named it the Jungle Goddess. And that ended up, and it grew with my gut health journey. So to begin with, I was making yogurt and I think a sauerkraut and a kimchi. But as I explored my gut health path, I started doing exclusion diets, restrictive diets. And out there's nothing pre-made, you make everything yourself. So if I wanted gluten-free snacks, I needed to make them. If I wanted grain-free, I was on a grain-free diet for a long time, I needed to make them. So my products expanded with my own personal needs and what I was making, because there's a lot of people with allergies, and especially food allergies, who are looking for maybe plant-based or gluten-free or dairy-free. So I had expanded this range, and then became a person that people would come to for gut health advice, for advice about managing intolerances. And so that grew on one side, but in Costa Rica, it's a tough place to make a living. So I always had things going on the side as well. So I dabbled in catering. I ran a pop-up restaurant. I was a poker dealer for a while. So yeah, lots of different things, dive master, so lots of different things. But it was that there was then coming to the end of the journey when it was just my time was up there. I think I'd learned all the lessons that I needed to learn and felt it was time to move on and sort of start spreading what I was doing and helping other people on their journey.
And what was that next step? So you came back to the UK, and then did you do more consultations, or did you just sort of try and continue what you were already doing to a new audience?
No, so I came back 3.5 years ago with the 7 suitcases and 2 very large dogs and descended on my mum. And originally I was looking at what I could do fermenting, but then lockdown happened because I came back in December 2019. So that for me was a great opportunity to just rethink my direction. And I got all of this learned experience, and I felt I needed to back that up with academia. So I trained as a integrated health and nutrition coach. I'm continuing my studies in nutritional therapy, but last year I also trained as a breathwork coach, which comes back to the stress, and that's why I got into breathwork, because stress is such a major cause and trigger for gut health problems, that I wanted something that could really help people manage their stress.
It sounds like you're helping people extend their toolkit so they can actually attack and tackle the issues that they're getting. I think I would love to dive a little bit more into the fermenting, like stripping it back to basics. Can you explain to the audience what is fermenting and what are the benefits of it?
Yeah, sure. So before refrigeration, fermentation was the way in which we were, especially in the southern and northern hemispheres, where we would preserve our fresh fruits and vegetables through the winter period, mainly vegetables. So preservation is the primary reason why we started fermenting, but it also really changes flavor of things. So if you think about the taste of vinegar, the taste of coffee, then blue cheese, soy sauce. So these are rich, we call umami flavors. And then the third one is for the health benefits, because when you ferment, the difference between fermentation and rotting food is the environment in which you keep it, because with the majority of fermentation you keep in a environment without oxygen. So and anything that and the way in which you do that is you have it in either a sealed jar or vessel, or you keep it under a level of liquid. And so sauerkraut, you'll keep it under its own juices. Lacto-fermented brining, which is like pickling, you keep it in a saltwater brine, because a lot of the bad pathogens and stuff, they need oxygen. And that's why if you open your fridge and you open a jar of something in there and there's mold on the top, the mold is only on the top. It's not underneath, because underneath there's no oxygen. So they can't feed. So this environment, especially when we add salt, when we take away oxygen, it creates an environment that's really favorable for beneficial bacteria, which we call probiotics. So pro, for biotic life. And you can get different types of ferments, different lengths of ferments. Basically, the longer something ferments for, the longer the shelf life, because it's called lactic acidic fermentation because it's creating a more acidic environment, and it's that acidic environment that preserves the food. So the more acidic, the longer it will preserve it for.
And does that make it a better form of fermenting, or is it good to have a variety of the different sort of shorter and longer term?
Variety is good. Some of them just don't suit longer ferments. So that was when I was at the big retreat festival and doing a demonstration. I wanted to demonstrate more unusual ways of fermenting, because everyone's used to sauerkraut and kimchi and kombucha and kefir. But what about a fermented coleslaw, which was one of the things that I demonstrated at the festival? Well, how about a fermented salsa? So salsa, the tomatoes, they're gonna break down quicker, so they suit a shorter ferment, whereas cabbage is a nice fibrous vegetable, so that suits a longer ferment. You can eat at any point in time, but the shorter the ferment, the quicker you're going to have to eat it, just purely because it doesn't have that level of acidity that provides that length of preservation. So it really depends on what you're fermenting. You can do ferment condiments, so fermented tomato ketchup, fermented mustard. I make fermented mustard.
Wow. Do you have a recipe book? It sounds
I don't, but I am writing a book.
Excellent.
So.
I think, you know, for people that perhaps don't fully know what fermenting is or haven't tried it, how easy is it? You know, is it something we can all just have a go at? Is it really accessible and we're not going to make ourselves ill? Because obviously that's the opposite of what we're trying to achieve, and people might be a little bit nervous of it.
Yeah, no, it is really accessible and cheap. You know, that's one of the things that why I didn't open a fermenting company when I came here, because it didn't sit right with me ethically, the price point that I'd have to pitch it at. So I'd rather teach people how to make it themselves, because like a 400 or 500 gram jar of sauerkraut can cost you £7. Certainly down here it can.
Yeah.
Where I can make a kilo for about £1.50. And equipment wise, you know, the clip jars are a really good jar to use to keep your fermenting. So a 1 litre clip jar, so that costs about £4. The little GU jars that you get your desserts in.
Oh yeah.
Most people have a stack of them in the cupboard.
Yep.
Well, that makes as a perfect weight to keep your ferment under a level of liquid. Then in its most simple, a sauerkraut is cabbage and salt. And that's it. So you've got a 1 litre jar, add in about 850 grams of shredded cabbage mixed with nearly a tablespoon of salt. Pack it down as hard as you can to get rid of any air bubbles. Remember, we don't want oxygen in there. Put your little GU jar on the top, and if you've put enough cabbage in, your lid is going to hit the top of that jar and push it down so that everything stays under liquid. And it's as simple as that. Leave it for... In warm weather, it ferments quicker, but you can start trying it at about 2 weeks. Normally in this country, it's around 4 weeks is the point where you'd want to then move it into the refrigerator, because the refrigerator will slow down that bacterial activity.
And what does it look like when it's ready to try? Or does it have a smell? Like, is there a way of knowing if you've never done it before?
The smell, it's a sour smell if you think it's acidic. So these things are a lot more sour. It all depends on what you put in it. So if it's just a green cabbage and salt, it looks like shredded green cabbage. It softens, but the salt still keeps it crunchy. But I'll do one with red cabbage, beetroot, carrots and ginger. So that's a bright red color. Yeah. I'll do a curry kraut with curry powder, so then that's with the turmeric, that's a bright yellow sauerkraut. You can add seeds in. It absorbs flavors really well.
It sounds fantastic. And actually, you mentioned the selling of fermented foods, and there are a couple of brands that pop into my head when I think of that. And you are absolutely right that it's a high price point. And actually, if someone doesn't want to, actually do it for themselves, is there anything you need to look out for if you are choosing to buy it to ensure that you're actually getting the benefit of it? Because I think there are probably some things that may look like they are, but aren't necessarily.
Yeah, so whatever you do, whether you ferment yourself or you buy it, there's a cost involved. So if you make it yourself, you're saving, but the cost is on your time. Yeah. So it depends on your personal situation. But if you want ferments with live bacteria in, live probiotics, then you want to be buying them from the fridge. You can buy sauerkraut and kimchi on the main aisle in the supermarket, but these are pasteurized. Now, it doesn't mean that they're no good for you, and they're still really good, because that process of fermentation kind of like pre-digests the food. So it helps to make the vitamins more bioavailable, releases some of the compounds in there, so it makes it easier to digest and to feed your gut bacteria and support it. So it's still valuable, even though it hasn't got any live bacteria in there. Things like kombucha, a lot of people like drinking kombucha. It's being aware that it is highly acidic. It's there's different fermenting paths, and kombucha has acetic fermentation. So if you leave a bottle of kombucha, it will go to vinegar. But that vinegar, if you drink a lot of kombucha, it can rot the enamel on your teeth.
Right.
And if it's sweet, it's got sugar in it. Some kombuchas can have as much sugar as a can of Coke. So it's worth having a look at it. And if it says no sugar, you've got to ask yourself, well, what is that bacteria feeding off of if there's no sugar in there? Yeah. Now, it can be a slow fermentation, but that will mean if there's hardly any sugar in there, just enough to keep the bacteria alive, it's not going to be very sweet. So it depends on your palate as well.
Yeah, I was about to say that. I'm having had it many times over the years in different forms. Your palate does have to adjust, I think. It's not necessarily, some of them are, but they're not always necessarily the initially most tasty thing. But actually, it's, as you said, it's the umami taste, isn't it? And actually, once you get used to it, I think it almost becomes more and more enjoyable. But initially, it might be a bit like, oh, and you sort of just need to test and try different things to get used to it, or find which ones that you prefer.
Definitely, because we're not used to that sour flavor here. They are, and if you go into Eastern Europe, it's in a lot. If you look at a lot of their foods, kefir, milk kefir, is one of the most biodiverse and most beneficial ferments for all of the bacteria in it. But in effect, it's soured milk, and we don't like soured milk. But you can train your taste. I mean, I started off taking kefir with just blending it up with fruits and maybe adding a little bit of honey and slowly take it out. Now I can just drink kefir as is. And so, it's about retraining your taste buds and waking up those sour taste receptors, as we should be doing for like bitters as well. We're too focused on sugar.
Yes, definitely. And then I think the thing that's interesting is there are so many different products available to us now. And do you recommend more of a mixture of products, or you find find one that you like and just stick with that? What would you recommend for the most health benefit?
The thing is, with most things like sauerkraut and kimchi, a tablespoon of that is for a good fermented product, a tablespoon of it is going to give you the same amount of probiotics as a probiotic pill. And the probiotics in it are very much connected to the environment. So my sauerkraut on the coast in the UK is going to taste different to my sauerkraut in a little hut in Costa Rica to in a high rise in London. So again, your quality of your ingredients, how fresh your ingredients are. You can make ferments with any vegetable. It doesn't have to be organic, with any water. It can be tap water, with any salt. So it can have iodine, a table salt. I recommend natural salts, filtered water, and if you can, if your budget allows for it, organic. But don't let those be barriers to fermenting, because the types of bacteria that exist in these ferments are really resilient, and they will proliferate. And so I'd rather people use what they've got, but aspire towards natural salt, filtered water, and organic vegetables.
Fantastic. That makes it feel so much more accessible, I think, to the majority of people. And I do.
And some people would tell me I'm wrong on that, but in my experience,
yeah, you're better to be doing it than not doing it, because you haven't got everything so-called perfect. And it's one of those things that I think when people hear the word bacteria, particularly after the last few years that we've had, that people are, I don't want to be going, why would I want to eat bacteria? So perhaps it might be a good moment to sort of touch upon what gut bacteria is, why this fermenting bacteria is good, and what that actually means to us and our bodies and our brains and the balance within our health.
So for every human cell, there are 1.3 bacteria in our body. So we are more microbes in our body. We are more microbes than we are human cells. They say there's around 33 trillion, like about 10,000 species. So this really is a colony, and it's not just the gut. We have different, we call it the microbiome. We have different microbiomes. So you have a skin microbiome, there is genitalia microbiome, there's gut microbiome, even in the digestive system there's a mouth microbiome, and they all help us. We've created over thousands of years of a symbiotic relationship with these microbes. So they actually do a lot of things that we're unable to do. So in the gut, what we call the gut microbiome, they're mainly in the large intestine. So most of our food has been absorbed by the time it gets to the large intestine. And then these gut bacteria can feast on what we've eaten. Now, obviously, depending on what you've eaten will depend on the species that you have. And a good balanced diet means you should have a good balanced microbiome, and those good bacteria and microbes in there are performing jobs like what they do. They mainly feed off of plant fibers. So this fiber that we eat, especially prebiotic, what's called prebiotic fiber, that's their preferred energy source. So when I say they feed off of that, a byproduct is they will create short-chain fatty acids in the gut. Now, we use short-chain fatty acids to help reduce inflammation in the body. They synthesize vitamin K, so we need vitamin K along with vitamin D for many different processes. So they're creating things that are valuable to our overall health. A number have been identified to cross the blood-brain barrier, so they can affect mood. Now, in your gut, 60 to 70% of your immune system is in the gut. Your gut produces around 90% of your serotonin, which is your feel-good hormone. And your gut bacteria plays an important role with interacting with your immune cells as well. So when we get that bacteria out of whack, so if you're on a diet that's high in sugar, that's high in fat, that is low in fiber, then your gut bacteria is going to be aligned to those food sources. And then what can end up happening is we get something called dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. And that leads to many different symptoms, lethargy, that exhaustion, trouble sleeping, weight problems. What can also happen in people who have cravings blame their cravings on their willpower. But what it can be is messaging from certain microbes in the gut to the brain to trigger your cravings. So there is this gut-brain connection. A number of these have been identified as being able to pass into the brain. There's a lot of research going on into the link between gut microbes and Alzheimer's, for example. Yeah. And a number of other health issues. So there's so many things that they influence. So they really are the good guys. Yeah. If you're in balance, if you're feeding the good guys, and it is this, when we say good and bad, it's more about balance of beneficial, because when there's always going to be non-beneficial microbes in our body, but as long as they're kept in check, then it reflects positively on our health.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are lots of things that we can all decide to do. And I'm guessing even just starting with, if you're having a very highly processed diet, to have less of that food, start eating more fruits and vegetables because you're going to get the fiber, the fermenting. So there's lots of ways we could try. And how quickly is the potential there to start seeing improvement? I know everyone is an individual, but is it something that you have to be patient with, or can it happen quite quickly in your experience?
It can happen quite quickly, but I encourage people to be patient with it. And a lot of my programs that I do with people are 3-month programs, because it does take time. And it is, to some people, 3 months seems like a really long period of time. But if you look back to 3 months ago, it really isn't. And it's a challenge because it is changing behaviors. But you don't want to do it too quickly. So as I said there about good fiber from fruits and vegetables feed this gut bacteria. If you suddenly start eating loads of fiber, it's going to overwhelm that gut bacteria. And what you might find is you start getting bloating, start getting more gas. And what I don't want people to start thinking is, oh my God, this is worse than where I was. Yeah. You need to introduce these things slowly. It's the same as anything when you're making changes. A lot of people like gung-ho into their diet, but then don't get the results that they're after. And a lot of the time it's like, have some more patience, introduce these things in slowly, add 1 extra vegetable a week to begin with. I've actually got a blog post on my website called The Power of 30, because I encourage people to try and get 30 different plant foods a week. So that's not just fruit and vegetables, it includes grains and legumes. And that might sound quite challenging, but it's not when you start breaking it down. So you just try and do 1 more a day, 1 more portion a day. And build
more
it up
rather
slowly.
Than less.
Yeah.
Which I think feels so much more achievable as well. because it's very easy to want to just switch your mindset. But ultimately, if you are trying to change lots of aspects of your diet and lifestyle, doing it in small steps is far more likely to stick in the long term.
Well, it's building habit, and it takes 30 days to establish a habit, but 90 days to really embed it as lifestyle. And what habit is going to stick for longer? That habit where you're like, right, I'm going to start running for an hour every day, or that habit of I'm going to take a 10-minute walk every lunchtime.
Yeah,
It's small steps, and once you've got that, pick it up, build it up.
Yeah, the consistency and the sustainability is most definitely the most important thing when it comes to any sort of lifestyle change, and also looking at evolving and adapting your identity, because particularly if you're coming from a very highly processed diet, if you are trying to switch to this, it is actually going to take time to start being the individual that makes those choices rather than the old ones, and you have to evolve yourself out of that. And again, that takes time and patience and a change of mindset too.
And it can often be a lot bigger than that, because you've got to think about, if you live with somebody, what are their habits, family, friends. And sometimes it does require breaking away from certain situations, because some of these can be a little bit toxic and prevent you from making those changes. So it is very much about creating your environment and a supportive environment for change.
Absolutely.
So that's something that I'm always encouraging with people, because I've ended up losing relationships and things along the way because of my choices. I drank a lot in Costa Rica, and it's actually, if I think about it now, back before then, when I was traveling, I moved a lot for my career, and it would be going home and having wine, and it built up. And in Costa Rica, I was drinking every day, and way too much every day, and it was very much what was done out there.
Yeah.
But it was such a trigger for my gut problems.
Yeah.
But I resisted. I used it as escapism, as
it's normalized,
many people do. It is normalized.
Yeah.
And that was my thing, if things weren't going well, instead of facing them, then it would be like, oh, go and get the wine, and then being around people who, I kind of refer to myself as a functioning drunk, because many people didn't have other things going on, so they would spiral a lot further down into that. And that's why I say this place was kind of duality of this. You could go two different ways, but I was highly functional, so I would leave them to it, but I still had way more than I needed. And it it finally got too much, and I've just turned about 4.5 years sober.
Congratulations.
And so that has definitely changed relationships and social settings. I'm now a member of the 5 a.m. club, so I get up just before 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to bed by 9 o'clock in the evening. So that again changes your circle of friends, what you're doing, the sort of things that are open to you. And sometimes it's difficult giving the familiar up, but it's about what you open yourself up to with making that change.
It's letting go of the right people, so that you can get the new people that are right for you for now and for your future.
Find your tribe.
Exactly that. So a question I do love to ask everybody, and sometimes it does leave people stumped, so take a moment. Are there any common myths linked to all the things that you do that you would like to debunk? Is there anything you think that people might think of, something that you want to say, no, that's not true?
One of the things was what I said about kombucha. is people can be drinking this so much and thinking it's healthy, but it may have a lot of sugar in it. And if a lot of people doing this, they're on this diet, this healthy life track, and don't realize that actually in order to feed this, it takes a lot of sugar.
They're being imported. I mean, would you recommend, is there a way of doing that? Even if you're having, for example, the sweeter, more sort of sugary ones, if you're having more of like a small glass full, is that okay? Or are you best just to avoid those ones altogether and try and go for the less sugary ones?
It depends on everything else in your diet. I mean, I very much promote a 80-20 rule. You know, if you're dealing with some sort of health issue and you're trying to get something under control, then that 20%, you know, that should be zero, because you're trying to understand what are my triggers. So I would like take someone through an elimination diet where you're not getting any real indulgence in that. But that's where I look to take people to. So it really depends on everything else. Eat 80%, aim for at least 80% of the time, eat healthy, and up to 20% of the time allow a little indulgence, because we have a society, a culture built around food. So I'm not about taking away the joy of eating. So it is, you've got to enjoy what you eat for it to be sustainable as a diet.
Yeah, without doubt. I definitely agree with you completely. And my next question is, what have you found personally to be the biggest challenge in helping and educating people in this area?
Getting people, we are culturally tied to the NHS. The NHS is great at saving lives, but they are not maintaining and optimizing your health. They haven't got the capacity to do that. So I think people's expectations of the NHS need to be rethought, and for people to start empowering themselves to take more of a role in their health journey. So yeah, I mean, if you're sick, then go to the doctors. But there's so many people who are eating too much sugar. You know, there is, you know, 40%, 1 in 4 people and 1 in 5 10-11-year-olds are obese in the UK. So that's a huge number. So that there's a huge risk of insulin resistance, which is all with type 2 diabetes is managed by diet and lifestyle. So instead of just going and looking for a pill, start to empower yourself to understand what changes to make in your diet, what changes to make in your lifestyle habits. And once people start doing that, then they're going to start seeking out people like myself. I can wear my health coach hat, which is more about helping you achieve your goals by helping you remove the barriers that are in the way. The nutritionist hat, which is all about what you should be, you know, what you could be eating, and the best way to use nutrition to support your health path. But people have to want to take on that role. And I think that the NHS it's so struggling with this.
Yeah, it's overwhelmed, isn't it?
It is overwhelmed. So I think it is about people who say, and that's the people who I start to see. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's those people who have reached health crisis, kind of like I did.
Yeah, likewise.
And looking for an alternative. But I want to pull that back further so people don't get to that point. Because it is a long haul out when you've got to that crisis point. And if we can start getting people to take an interest earlier, then it can save a lot of pain and upset.
It is exactly why I started this podcast in the first place, and I do what I do, because exactly that. We had our triggers, in fact, both very young, and we had to, once you are faced with a health issue, I guess you can go one way or the other. But I was very much of the same opinion that, well, what can I do? Is there anything I can do to, feel a little bit in control as well? Because, when you do face health issues, sometimes it can feel like it's out of your hands when doctors are making those decisions. But actually, if you can take even just a few small changes that can make you feel better and can start taking you in the direction of feeling better, that's fantastic. But even more importantly, if you can stop people ever getting to that extreme situation, that they just have all these nice lifestyle choices, and they're supported by the environment around them to create that life, and hopefully we can prevent the need of the NHS that is currently obviously at critical point. And unfortunately, I agree with you. I think it's only going to get worse in the next few decades, because there is such a health crisis. And I don't think, even though there is so much information out there, I don't think most people feel empowered that there is actually things that they can do to help themselves.
And that's where, it's not about us and them. There's so much that the NHS, and I mean, the NHS are employing health coaches now.
Yeah.
So they are recognizing this. And so there is this relationship that can be had. I work with doctors, so I can, if someone is coming to me for help on their situation, they are still under doctor's care. They're still under medication.
Yeah.
They are to stay on that and stay under that guidance, because, I don't diagnose.
No.
So
sometimes it's helping them find the right doctor as well, isn't it? The right doctor for their situation.
It's focusing on those two different paths. And if people have got to that health crisis, then they need to fix the problem, and that may require medications and stuff that the doctor will provide. But there's the whole diet and lifestyle that we can be changing alongside that to support healthier living, and with the aim of reducing their need on that doctor. But they get critical when you're in acute illness, then quite often you're going to need both of those. Or in a chronic, or if you're in a chronic condition. But ultimately it is that preventing people from that need in the first place.
Yeah, no, I love it. We're very much on the same page with all of those. My favorite question to ask people: what inspires you?
Inspires me. I mean, learning, people empowering themselves, stepping outside of boundaries. It's one of the things that I do a lot. Is I think there's so much that you can learn when you step out of your comfort zone, and I've done that so many times, and I continue. It's not easy, but it's that pushing yourself out and seeing people who do remarkable things and pushing themselves outside of their comfort zone. I think that is what, and it's seeing what we are truly capable of. Release it's taking down those barriers, because it's finding your passion. I followed society's expectations for, go to college, get a job, get a house, work your way up the ladder, have 2.4 children. But, I hit a point where actually that's not suiting me. And the inspiration that I've got from my travels and my experiences and how much I've grown through all of that is, I would live this life over again with Crohn's disease. Because if not for Crohn's disease, I wouldn't have this treasure trove of experiences to be able to, to live with and to inspire me.
That is very special, very special. And just we'll start to draw to a close now. if there was one thing, the one thing that you could share that you think everyone would benefit from knowing, what would it be?
You can do anything you put your mind to. Absolutely anything. We limit ourselves. Two of the things that when I came back that I noticed here was how much people said, I can't, or I don't have time. And what I always do is I challenge people on that. And I'm like, you have the time, you just choose to spend it on something else. There is very little we're not capable of doing. So you are most likely capable, you choose not to. So it's recognizing what you do as a choice, and that you really can do anything you put your mind to.
Opening your mindset up completely, isn't it? Yeah. I love that. So can you give us the places where we need to go to find you on the internet?
Yeah, so my website is www.thejunglegoddess.com. So you can find about my upcoming events on there. I have next week a free webinar called the Gut Breath Connection, because being a breathwork coach, I really wanted to connect that with the gut. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm doing a Menopause Mastery free webinar, so looking at diet and lifestyle changes for helping to navigate the menopause. You can sign up to my newsletter, and on sign up you get a gut health guide. And if you want to follow me anywhere on social media, I'm at Gut Health UK. So I'm Jungle Goddess Gut Health UK. So thejunglegoddess.com and at Gut Health UK.
Wonderful. That is fantastic. And I know people are going to definitely be going on there and looking for it, because it is such an important thing, I think, for us all just to know that a little bit more about, because we can be more empowered than perhaps we realize.
And that's why I try and reflect in my services, because I offer like a discovery session to people if they're not sure what health and nutrition coaching is, a pathfinder, so people who are really know where they want to go and feel that they can get there, but they need some direction. So that's more of a, here you go, let's help you set up an action plan to get you where you want to be. And then I do personalized programs, which are with people generally with larger health issues that they're trying to address. So it's that reflection of trying to give you that information, that toolkit, that you are then empowered to manage your health going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like there are so many rabbit holes we could have gone down. You've got such a diverse knowledge and experience, which has been lovely to listen to this afternoon. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, no, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Now podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I would love to hear from you, so don't forget you can get in touch through social media, clicking through the links in the show notes, or email me directly, hello@livefitnow.co.uk. Until the next time.